A sword sat in an Ohio basement for 60 years before anyone looked at it twice. It sold for $300 at an estate sale in 1995 because nobody in the family knew what they were holding. That exact blade came back across the auction block last year and closed at $42,000. Multiply that mistake across every attic, closet, and storage unit in the country, and you start to understand why this list exists. 10 swords, all 10 are appreciating fast. The last one on this list has been made permanently illegal to export by the Japanese government. That's the one we're ending on. Let's get into it. Number 10, the Highland basket-hilt broadsword, the kind carried before 1746. Forget the movie version of a Scottish sword for a second. The real collector's piece is this. A cage of forged steel bars built around the hand, designed specifically to stop a saber cut to the fingers in a melee. After the British crushed the Jacobite Rising at Culloden, they passed a law banning Highlanders from owning weapons of any kind, and that ban held for almost 40 years. Every basket hilt that made it through that period without being surrendered or melted down had to be hidden in a thatched roof, buried in a peat bog wherever a family could stash it. Those survivors are exactly what collectors are after now. 20 years back, you could find one in rough shape for under $1,200. Today, the same sword in documented original condition is closer to $4,000 to $7,000, and anything with a traceable clan history has gone past $15,000. Flip the hilt over and look inside the basket cage for a maker's stamp, usually out of Sterling or Glasgow. Then check the blade itself, because most of these were rehilted with imported German trade blades from Solingen, rather than built with a matching native blade. If there's an old basket hilt in your family that everyone's called just decoration for 2 generations, that's exactly the kind of sword that needs a second look before it ever gets sold. Number 9, the Confederate-made cavalry saber, built somewhere between 1861 and 1865. Here's something that surprises people. 2 cavalry sabers from the exact same war, same year, can be worth 10 times apart, and it has nothing to do with which side won. The Union had working arsenals and an open pipeline of imported German blades. The Confederacy had neither. Armories like Boyle, Gamble, and McPhee out of Richmond, or the College Hill Arsenal in Nashville, were building sabers out of whatever scrap iron and railroad steel they could scrounge by hand under wartime pressure. That's exactly why so few good ones are left. A Union import saber from the same conflict runs $300 to $500 today. A Confederate-made saber with a verified maker's mark is a $3,000 to $8,000 sword, and the rare, pristine ones with original scabbards have gone 5 figures. Run your eye along the spine of the blade near the guard for a stamped maker's name, then look closely at the brass guard itself. Southern-made guards are noticeably rougher, less uniform, none of the machined finish you'd see on a Union or imported piece. If there's a Civil War saber in the family with a story attached to a Confederate ancestor, get it looked at by someone who knows the difference before anyone assumes it's just another old sword. Number 8. The British 1897 Patton Infantry Officer's Sword. This won armed British officers through the Boer War, both world wars, and it's still underpriced today simply because so many of them survived. Officers bought these privately, almost always from Wilkinson's Sword in London, which is why even standard issue examples have hollow ground blades and presentation grade finishing. The real value split comes down to the etching. A plain blade is common and cheap. A blade etched with a specific regiment's crest and battle honours, especially a regiment tied to a famous engagement, is a completely different sword, and one with a named officer's engraving that ties back to an actual service record is rarer still. 10 years ago, these were trading at $150 to $250. Regimentally marked ones now bring $800 to $1,500, and a named, traceable officer's sword with documented history has cleared $4,000. Look just below the hilt for the Wilkinson name stamped alongside a serial number, both of which the company can sometimes trace back through their own sales ledgers. Whatever you do, don't have it re-etched or re-polished. The original etching and patina is the entire value proposition here. Number 7. The US model 1913 Cavalry Sabre, better known to collectors as the Patton Sabre, and that's not a marketing nickname, it's literal history. A young lieutenant named George Patton was sent to the French cavalry school at Saumur in 1912 to study swordsmanship, and he came back arguing the army's curved sabres in mounted combat. He helped design the saber that became the model 1913. By the time it hit full production, cavalry charges were already on their way out thanks to trench warfare, which is exactly why genuine wartime production pieces are scarce for a sword this modern. These were $150 swords a decade ago in rough shape. Original World War I production in good condition now runs $600 to $1,200, and full sets with matching inspector stamps on the scabbard have crossed $2,000. Number 6. The medieval European knightly arming sword, meaning anything actually forged before 1500. This is where the whole category jumps from collectible to museum grade, and it comes with a warning attached. Most medieval swords floating around flea markets and antique shops are 19th or 20th century reproductions, some of them deliberately aged to fool buyers. A genuinely authenticated medieval blade is one of the rarest objects a person could ever stumble onto by accident. Real authentication comes down to blade typology, the system historians use to classify swords by cross-section, fuller length, and pommel shape, combined with metallurgical testing to confirm the steel and forging method actually match the era claimed. Authentic, documented medieval swords just don't show up at flea market prices. When one surfaces at a serious auction house, the bidding usually opens above $20,000, and pieces with verified provenance or battlefield archaeology behind them have cleared six figures. There's no quick visual check here, and that's the point. Number 5. The US model 1860 light cavalry saber, the most common sword of the entire Civil War, and proof that common doesn't mean cheap once you know what to look for. Over 200,000 were made for the Union Army, but value swings hard depending on who actually produced the blade. Some came from domestic makers like Ames Manufacturing. Others were rushed in from Solingen, Germany, to cover wartime shortages. A plain, worn, unmarked example is still only worth $200 to $300 today. But one with a clean inspector's cartouche, a readable maker's stamp, and a scabbard with intact leather is worth far more, regularly $800 to $1,500, and a documented saber tied to a known cavalry unit at a known battle has sold for multiples of that. Turn it over and look at the back of the guard near the pommel for a small stamped cartouche, government inspector's initials, then trace the spine near the hilt for the maker's name. Whatever condition it's in, the original patina and surviving bluing carry real cash value on their own. Number 4. The Civil War presentation sword, the kind that was gifted rather than issued. It was common practice during the war for a regiment, a town, or a group of soldiers to pool money and commission an elaborately engraved sword as a gift for their commanding officer, usually presented at a public ceremony covered in the local paper. These swords were never meant to see combat. Gold-washed, hand-engraved, fitted with ivory or mother-of-pearl grips, and critically, inscribed with both the recipient's name and the donor's. That inscription is what separates a decorative antique from a documented piece of history, because it can usually be cross-checked against service records, regimental histories, and old newspapers to confirm exactly who carried it and where. An unidentifiable presentation sword in good shape sells for $1,500 to $3,000. The same sword with an inscription that ties to a specific identifiable officer, especially one with a real combat record, has sold for $10,000 to $20,000. Number 3, the Edo period samurai katana, specifically a signed blade from the Shinto era, roughly 1596 through the 1780s. Japanese sword collecting runs on a completely different system than Western militaria. Everything centers on the smith's signature, the mei, carved directly into the tang under the handle wrap. A signed blade, zaimei, that matches a known documented smith is worth dramatically more than an unsigned blade, mumei of comparable craftsmanship, even when the steel quality is identical. The NBTHK, Japan's sword appraisal authority, issues papers certifying a blade's smith, era, and quality, and serious collectors won't touch a significant katana without them. An unpapered Edo period blade in decent polish might sell for $2,000 to $4,000. The same blade with NBTHK papers confirming a respected smith from a known school climbs to $10,000 to $30,000, and blades tied to the most celebrated Edo-era smiths have hit six figures. Here's the actual giveaway: the signature itself, A genuine period May has a carving depth and character style consistent with the smith and school it claims. Exactly what a trained appraiser checks first, and exactly what gives away a cheap reproduction, where the characters tend to look too clean, too shallow, or stylistically wrong for the era. The blade's curvature and temper line need to match the period too. None of this is a 5-second check, which is exactly why you never clean a tang signature yourself and never assume what you have. If you've inherited one, get it into a proper wooden shirasaya storage mount and find someone who specializes specifically in Japanese swords. Number 2, the World War II Japanese officer's sword, but only the version almost nobody realizes exists, the Gendaito. A traditionally hand-forged blade made the old way by a licensed swordsmith, carried by a small minority of officers alongside hundreds of thousands of mass-produced swords. This is the single most misunderstood category in the entire hobby, because to someone who doesn't know what they're looking at, a $300 sword and a $40,000 sword can look almost identical hanging on a wall. Most Japanese officer swords American servicemen brought home are Shawato, machine-made, oil-quenched blades churned out by the thousands in arsenal shops to meet wartime production demand. A genuine Gendaito has an actual hamon, the wavy temper line from real differential hardening, and a traceable signature from a licensed smith. A Shawato carries a stamped arsenal mark instead, often a small star or character that flags it as non-traditional manufacture. An identified Shawato sells for $400 to $900 today. A papered signed Gendaito from a recognized traditional smith brings $8,000 to $40,000 depending on reputation. Number 1. The koto, old sword, meaning any Japanese blade forged before 1596, and the rarest, most valuable edged weapon category on the planet. Some koto blades are attributed to legendary historical smiths whose names carry the same weight in this world that Stradivarius carries for violins. The Japanese government takes this seriously enough that the finest examples get registered as national treasures or important cultural properties, a legal status that permanently bars the sword from ever leaving Japan, regardless of who owns it or what they're offered. Every other sword on this list has a path to value that runs through an American attic or a Civil War ancestor. Koto blades almost always trace back through Japan itself, surfacing from old samurai family estates. A koto with solid but unremarkable NBTHK papers can bring $20,000 to $60,000. One attributed to a legendary named school, fully papered and authenticated, has sold privately and at auction for 7 figures. The tell here is the tang itself. Centuries of natural oxidation create a patina that's essentially impossible to fake convincingly, paired with file marks and a signature style that has to actually match the era it claims. If you ever come across a sword claimed to be koto, full NBTHK authentication has to happen before any cleaning, selling, or even much handling. At this level, the gap between guessing and knowing is the gap between a few $1,000s and a number that changes your life.